Alright, continuing chapter 11, page 298, paragraph E states that the Class 1 test, when performed on the entire train of the engineer, shall be notified with the successful test. Most of the time, notification is provided with the engineer writing, and this could be provided with the Viva, the handheld radio, cell, or telephone communication with the train dispatcher, as long as it's provided to the crew prior to the train departure. A written electronic record is created with the maintained in the crew in the cab of the controlling locomotive until the train either reaches destination or another Class 1 testing performed on the entire train. If the relieving of the crew of the charge of the train information is not available for the oncoming crew, the violation regulation has occurred, and inspectors should apply the appropriate enforcement action based on the systematic recurring problem on the case-to-case basis. In order for the railroad to advance with the train beyond the point of the information is not available for the oncoming crew, the railroad would have to obtain the correct Class 1 test information via fax, telephone provided with the information crew on conduct, or after another Class 1 brake test provided with the crew of the new Class 1 information. The rule requires to identify the person performing the Class 1 test to be entered in the Class 1 test 1 information. The FRA will accept the full name, first name, initial, last name, and employee ID number satisfying the requirement that the FRA will not accept the adjusted initials Carmen in the North Yard or foreign line for requirement. Inspectors should be taking appropriate enforcement action when it is discovered. Inspectors should also make sure that the crew does not have the computer printout that indicates the conductor of the crew as an individual making Class 1 tests unless the individual performed the test. The Class 1 brake test information is relevant only to the Class 1 test when it is performed on the entire train. The information does not have to update as the cars are edited to removed from the train while the train is en route. Since the regulation requires the information to remain with the train until it reaches its destination, another Class 1 test is performed on the entire train. The information shall not be altered if the random road changes the number of the cars on the original slip. The indicator should take an appropriate enforcement action to correct the problem. Alright, your statute 232-207 Class 1A brake test at a 1,000-mile inspection. For Class 1A test location, the most restrictive block cars, the train was determined in location where the test being performed. For example, the train departs point A and travels to 500 miles to point B, where it picks up a previously tested block cars of the en route, which are traveled at 800 miles since the Class 1 brake test. The crew does not perform a Class 1 brake testing when in training the cars. The entire train must receive a Class 1A brake test within 200 miles from point B, even though the location is only 700 miles from point A. Defective equipment may be moved from the past or location with a Class 1A brake test performed only if the requirements are contained in Statute 232.15 has been satisfied. If the location of one of the meeting of the criteria found in Statute 232.15, the car should not be moved until the repairs are completed. As with the Class 1 brake test, in order to properly perform Class 1A brake tests, both sides of the equipment must be observed, and sometimes during the inspection process. Paragraph C contains the provision and requirements for railroads designated to maintain a list of the location of Class 1A inspectors will be performed. For the list should be made with the available the FRA upon request. If an inspector needs the information, then the regional office must be contacted so that the regional office can make the request in railroad writing. A railroad cannot just designate a major city if there are multiple locations in or around the city that can perform the Class 1A test. The specific yard locations need to be identified with the mile marker. The FRA requires them notified at least 30 days in advance in any changing the list of Class 1A test locations. The FRA realizes that the may occurrence of emergency such as derailments may make possible unsafe for the train to reach a location but the railroad has designated with the Class 1A inspection. Consequently, the rules and permits the railroad to pass 30 days written notification requirement. In this instance, the provided with the FRA notified within 24 hours after the designation has changed. The paragraph also makes clear the failure to perform a Class 1A brake test as a designated location will constitute failure to properly perform the inspection. Statute 232-209 Class 2 brake test intermediate inspection. Class 2 brake test is intended to ensure the brakes on these cars are added and applied release. That they added to not compromise integrity of the train's braking system. Therefore, the leakage of the airflow must be performed when the cars are added to the train to ensure the integrity of the train brake system. Both sides of the equipment must be observed and sometime during the inspection process. The brakes shall apply on each of the car added to the train remain applied until the release is initiated. The retesting is allowed on those cars found with the brakes not applied. It should be noted that the defective equipment may be moved from either the past location or Class 2 brake test is performed only if the requirement of Statute 232.15 has been satisfied. Paragraph B requires that all the release brakes of those cars added to the brake on the rear of the car train verify that allows the railroad to conduct a roll-by inspection for this purpose. Paragraph C permits alternative rear application release portion of the test. Alternative permits the locomotive engineer to relay on the rear car gauge of the end of the trailer device, determining that the train's brake pipe pressure is reduced at least 5 psi, then restored at least 5 psi in lieu of the direct observation of the rear car application release. Paragraph D contains the requirements relating to the inspection car of the blocks of the cars added to the train while the train is en route. The paragraph clears that the cars are given the Class 2 brake test added to the train, and then the car added must receive the Class 1 brake test at the next forward location where the facilities are available to perform the inspection. Paragraph F contains the requirements relating to adding the cars to the block cars while the train is en route. The paragraph informs the railroad that the cars are picked up en route and that have not been previously tested and kept in and connected to the source compressed air to receive the Class 1 brake test and added with the train. Alternatively, a railroad may elect to perform a Class 2 brake test at the time of the car added to the train en route. The FRA intends to make the car clear that when the option is elected, the car is added of the fashion must be given a Class 1 brake test at the next forward location where the flexibility are provided with such attention. Section Statute 232-211, Class 3 brake test, train line continuity inspection. The purpose of the Class Brake 3 test is ensuring the integrity of the train line. Minor change of the transit occurs. Basically, a Class 3 brake test ensures that the train brake pipe is properly delivering the air to the rear of the train. The inspection is designed to perform whenever the continuity of the brake is broken and uninterrupted. When a car locomotive is added and removed from the train, the Class 3 test must be performed as prescribed in paragraph B. The required test content cannot be performed when the brake pipe pressure at the rear of the train at least 60 psi is indicated by the accurate gauge at the end of the train device, and 20 psi brake pipe reduction and be made. When the continuity of the brake pipe is broken and uninterpreted, but the train consists otherwise remaining unchanged, it may determine the brake pipe pressure being restored in rear of the train as indicated by the rear car gauge at the end of the train device prior to the proceeding. In the absence of the rear car gauge at the end of the train device, visual application release of the rear car brakes can be made only if the train consists of unchanged, which includes the cars and locomotives. Alright, Statute 232-213, extended haul trains. Railroads permitted to designate trains with extended haul trains, which allows such a train to be operated with 1,500 miles between the brake and inspection. The designation of such train must be written with the associated administrative safety designation, including origination, location, destination of extended haul portion of each train. The trains added or deleted related must be submitted with the revision. Associated administrator for the safety headquarters will be provided updated lists electronically with the regions that are submitted. Once their train is designated with the extended haul train, it may be operated extended haul train with the official list of the revised properly submitted with the FRA. Changes cannot be made on a daily basis with the train dispatcher. All the changes must be made with the written associated administration of the safety as explained above. The railroad cannot be changed through a regional office. Extended haul trains are permitted one pickup, one set over en route. If more than one pickup with one set occur, the inspector should submit a violation of each of the occurrence. Also, the qualified mechanical inspector must perform the appropriate inspection for all pickups and set-outs. At no time will the FRA penalize the railroad for setting out the defective car during the extended haul train movement. These type of set-outs do not count against the set-out rule. At a location where a car or pickup is en route, as long as the qualified maintenance inspector has performed the inspection and the car, all the train crew added to the car and the train only have to perform the Class 3 brake test. The qualified maintenance inspector does not have to be location, simply add the cars to the train. If the train operating the two extended segments and another extended outbound inspection must be conducted with the qualified maintenance inspector. The cars being added and removed at this location, it would have to count as only one permitted pickup in the set out and routes. Whether done before an inbound outbound inspection performed is important as in 2-1s. Compliance with the one pickup and set out rule and termination point of the extended haul portion of the extended haul run. Unless this location final destination further run, the Class 1 inspection of the train must be performed before the train can continue any further. Statute 232-215, transfer train brake test. The transfer train is defined as Statute 232-5. The rule of this train travels between the point of the origination and the point of destination located no more than 20 miles apart. The definition makes clear that the transfer train may pick up the delivered freight equipment when en route and destination. Cars made up and added to the transfer train will train and is en route, provided that the transfer train brake is performed in a location where the cars are added. The train is limited to a total of 20 miles at the point of origin, not location where the new cars are added. It is possible for the operator to train in the distance of 60 miles on the transfer train brake test, provided that the train brake test is performed on the entire train at each 20-mile interval. When the rule permits the transfer to conduct when the brake pipe is charged with 60 psi indicated with the gauge of the rear train when the 50 psi brake pipe reduction is permissible to conduct this at 90 psi brake pipe pressure. However, the 90 psi is used by the FRA except for the 20 psi pipe reduction that has been made with the 15 psi allowance was allowed to lower brake pipe pressure. Please note that the retest of the car, the brake application during the transfer test should be made using the same brake pipe pressure during the original transfer test. The transfer test is performed at 60 psi brake pipe pressure. The retest can be made from after the car is charged to 60 psi with a 15 psi reduction. If the transfer test is performed at 90 psi brake pipe pressure, then the retest should be at 90 psi with a 20 psi brake pipe reduction. Statute 232-217, train brake test conducted using yard air when inspectors encounter the location where the yard is air least the 80% psi. They make sure the leakage of the air flows has been conducted with the proper brake plate pressure. The locomotives are attached. Where paragraph D contains calibration requirements for the yard test, the FRA's intent is the only gauge to be tested calibrated every 92 days. Industrial type device such as time O tested an individual railroad manufactured device fixed at 1/4 inch or 5/16 of an inch orifice. Increase the air pressure of a 1/4 inch orifice to reduce the brake pipe pressure. The FRA does not believe that the orifice needed to be calibrated unless the physical evidence damage to the device. 232-219 double heading or helper service. Although the brake system and locomotives are required to be inspected daily, the FRA continues to believe that the visual information for operation of the helper locomotives brakes must be made to each time the locomotive is added to the train. A helper locomotive found with the inoperative effective train brakes is repaired, and prior to the use of the L's removed from the train. If it cannot be repaired, must be tagged and taken to the nearest location for the repairs. Paragraph C requires a helper link device similar technology designed the distinctive alarm notifying the engineer and allowing the loss of the communication as well as the reset the capability of the cab and the locomotive available to the locomotive engineer. Such devices must be tested, recalibrated, necessary according to the manufacturing instruction every 365 days. Alright, subpart D, periodic maintenance and testing requirements. The subpart provides with the periodic brake testing, maintenance, and testing requirements. Equipment used in freight and other and non-passenger trains. Inspectors need to periodically monitor activity of a car repair facility and ensure compliance. Check the shall be capable of obtaining the single car testing date. Single car test areas are performed on the cars that have not been in a single car within 12 months. Check the handbrakes that are being inspected and tested. If the brake shows do not apply against the wheel when the handbrake is applied, the railroad should take a corrective action. Appropriate enforcement action should be taken. The inspector monitors single car testing before performed on cars that require such tests. That are daily periodic testing is being performed on single car test devices. Paragraph E of Statute 232-303 contains the provision permitting the cars to be removed to the location when necessary. Repairs are made to the location when the single car, the repair track, of the air brake test can be performed only if the car, and if it cannot be performed in the same location where the repairs are conducted. The FRA disagrees assertion many of the railroads of the air brake test. The repairs shall not be required in location that lack the ability to perform single car repair track of the brake testing. Therefore, the inspector should not entertain such rhetoric. Pursuant to Title 49 CFR 232-305, the single car is tested and performed on the car at least once every 5 years to 8 years for new and rebuilt cars. Within 12 months of the car is on the repair track. Also, if any of the car is removed from the train with a defective air brake test, Receive a single car test. The inspector can request the railroad to provide the single car test date for the cars, preferably using the UMLR system. If the railroad cannot provide the information, the inspector should notify the regional specialist, who then in turn shall notify the headquarters. Additionally, inspectors are encouraged to request the test date on each of the cars as being considered with a civil penalty if the car has not been single car tested for the 5-year period, and other violation shall be taken against the car. Inspectors should also periodically run a list of the cars and have received attention in the shop of the repair track if these cars shall have received the single car of the track test within 12 months. If now, violation should be considered. Alright, Section 232.305B1 requires a single car test to be performed on the car. The brake cutting out of an inoperative removed from the train. This means if the car has been properly tagged with inoperative brakes and set out of the train, it must be a single car test. If the railroad removes the car from the train and when the brake cuts with or without a defective tag, the inspector observed this single car test would have to be performed on the car. However, if the inspector finds the car out of the yard, siding of the brakes cut out and the burden of proof is on the inspector to establish whether the car is set out with the train, the brakes cut on some of the yard, crew cut the brakes on where the switching of the car yard. The inspector cannot assume that the brakes were cut out when set out of the train. The defective tag of the warrant witness a statement. Section 232.305B5 identifies the various wheel defects triggering single car testing of the car. The requirement applies to the railroad to remove the wheels from the car. The defective wheel condition is especially true for the built-up tread and condition. There are no federal regulations addressing built-up tread, but the Y made with the code of the Association of American Railroad billing record would have to be used in enforcement action regarding noncompliance performing a single car test for built-up tread condition. Section 232.305E requires the single car test to be performed on every new and rebuilt before it is placed in service. Inspectors should periodically monitor the activity of the car manufacturing plants. Alright, when a car is in the shop of the repair track of the piston travel, must be checked for limits of the piston travel. The range from the equipped from the 12-inch stroke to 1.5, 8.5 on 10-inch diameter brake cylinders has been changed. The new limit is 6 and 9 inch. If the piston travel found less than 6 inches or no more than 9 inches, the testing of the brakes on the shop of the repair track of the piston travel should adjust nominally to 7.5 inches. This change is based on the waiver docket number, the FRA 2004-19402, which is conditionally granted within August 30th, 2005. Further, the waiver also requires the car should have the empty loaded valve tested. If so, equipped with prescribed in the AAA standard S48604, section 461 through 465. Anytime the single car is performed on the car or the inspector, irrespective of whether the value has changed or not, please note that the test is not required if the car is loaded, since the test can only be performed when the car is empty. Inspectors should ensure that the railroads are conducting inspection of the accuracy operation brake indicators on so equipped and indicators broken and unreadable. The FRA accepts the correction taking place of the car shop at the repair track. Section 232.309 states that mechanical test device such as the pressure gauge, flow meters, or orifices are such calibrated once every 92 days. Paragraph D requires the test equipment single car device placed in the service that shall be tagged and labeled within the date of the next calibration due. The tab again labeled again be affixed with the single car testing device, brake cylinder test device, gauge, but it is difficult to tag or label to test a coupling. If the testing of a coupling is chained and cabled to a single car test device that was considered as a unit, if a single car test device is testing coupling and or calibrated with the PERTS S486, some of the facilities of the railroad can allow accept testing coupling that identifying the marking and the number that is unique inscribed, and that would mean the same unique number of the mark inscribed in the test device. That would make it a unit as is discussed above. Tag and label of the test device would apply to the entire unit. Motor Power and Equipment 9863 Subpart E end of the trains on May 31st, 2001. Subpart E end of the train devices became effective in order to aid in inspection testing requirements of the devices, as well as issue involved in the routing failures. Modified versions of which is provided. When does the device have to be armed? The device has to be armed and operable from the time the train departs from the point of the installation until the train reaches the destination. According to Title 49 CFR 232-407F, the communication cannot be established location with the device installed with the train move up and 1 mile from the location restricted in order to establish the communication. If the communication is not established within 1 mile of the movement, the train must be stopped. The device must be either repaired or replaced. The communication established before the train continue. The train can order the issue to restrict for the train exceeding 30 miles an hour the entire trip, provided with the train does not transverse to any defined heavy grade. If the communication is established, the train must be stopped, and appropriate inspection testing requirements of Statute 232-409A through C must be satisfactory and performed before the train can continue. What tests have to be performed at the point of installation? It must be understood that the installation could include both front and rear devices, whether either of the devices installed before the train departs. The following must be performed. It must determine if the identification code entered in the front of the unit is identical to the unit code of the rear unit. Title 49 CFR 232-409A. Determine the quantitative valve break of the pressure displayed in the front of the unit within 3 pounds per square inch. Reading displayed at either the rear end of the train unit and properly calibrated gauge for the rear of the train. Reading must be compared after the train is charged. Title 49 CFR 232-409. The test has to be made to ensure the device is capable of initiating emergency power brake application from the rear of the train. Title 49 CFR 232-409C. Alright, your brake pipe test pressure is and ensure the device is capable of initiating emergency power brake application with the rear of the train. There are currently 4 acceptable methods of performing this test. The first 3 methods require each with the rear of the train and the last car of the train establishing brake pipe pressure and arming the device. In the first method, controlling locomotive would transmit the emergency brake application from the front unit of the manual, causing the emergency application to be initiated with the rear of the train, therefore dumping the whole train in the emergency. The second method requires the closing of the angle cock on the last and second to last car of the train that controlling the locomotive transmits the emergency brake application in front of the unit manual switch. Under this method, only the last 2 cars of the train will effectuate an emergency brake application. Alright, using a third method, the individual will close the angle cock between the rear end of the train and the last car. The control locomotive transit emergency brake application front of the unit manual switch to the individual rear of the end of the train can be determined whether the emergency valve functions properly either by observing an emergency indicator pop out, observing the brake pipe pressure at the rear device going to 0 while hearing the exhaust of the air from the device. Final acceptable method of inspection bench test of devices front and rear would be performed in a reasonable time period with the device being armed and placed on the train. Can anyone perform these tests? The end of the train regulation does not establish a specific requirement concerning who performs the necessary tests. However, in accordance with Statute 239-409, if any one of the crew member that performs the test, the locomotive engineer has to be informed that the test, both front and rear devices, was successfully performed. This can be by any means determined that the railroad to the appropriate. However, the written electronic record of the notification has to be maintained with the controlling locomotive for engineering at the point of the installation. Notification must include the location, date, and time the test was performed, the name of the individuals who performed the test. If one individual in the front of the device and another individual tested the rear device, the notification would have included the information for the 2 separate tests. The written information is not required in subsequent crew changes requirements. With these tests on apply with the training using the disrupted power unit, DPUs in the rear of the train, know the type of the train accepted with the 2-way end of the train requirement, provide the train as a locomotive located at the rear of the train capable of making the emergency brake application through the commanding affected railroad telemetry by the crew member, the radio contact with the lead of the controlling locomotive. Alright, what is a bench test? The purpose of a particular test is to ensure that the front of the unit all transmit emergency brake application signal to the rear of the rear device is capable of initiating the emergency brake application with the rear of the train as required in the Statute 232-405A. The brake head test consisting of the test both of the front and rear units devices that will be used. on the train that can be tested independently each other, as long as the test is performed at the location where the device will be installed on the train. Testing the rear of the unit, applying air pressure on the device, transmitting the emergency brake application from running using the front using manual switch. The individual performing the would determine the emergency value function properly, either observing the emergency indicator pop out, observing the brake pipe pressure displayed on the gauge of the rear device to zero, hearing the valve, hearing the exhaust air of the device. The front of the unit will use the control locomotive of the train would be tested transmitting emergency brake from the device using the front of unit manual switch. A rear device would have successfully received the signal activity of the emergency air valve. Both tests must be performed with reasonable time period prior to the device being armed and placed on the train. What is a reasonable time period? A reasonable time period must be determined on a case-to-case basis based on the factual situation, specific location, and numerous factors that impact the notation reasonable. The following discussion is intended with the general guidance for the inspectors to consider the determination whether the bench test at a particular location was conducted with a reasonable time of the installation of the train. The discussion is not intended to create, establish any strictly time requirements. The following factors should be considered: the environmental of the device, tested and stored, free of weather elements, free of the excessive dirt, free of the dirt, grease, accessibility of possible tampering, physical treatment of the device after such bench test, railroad tracking monitoring device after testing, use of locomotive after testing of the front unit, past effective bench testing procedure of the particular location. For the example, if the device is tested and stored in a controlled controlled environment, free of the weather elements, excessive grease and dirt, the reasonable amount of the time between the testing and installation of the device may be between 8 hours or more. Where in a circumstance where the device is haphazardly thrown into the corner of the shop and air placed in the rear of the truck and bounced around with the yard after being tested, the reasonable amount of the time may be 1 hour or less. Furthermore, effective railroads bench press testing pressure should also be considered determining with the constituting reasonable time period. Consequently, inspectors should be provided with detailed evidence and fully describe the railroad tension stress procedure in order to support the determination that the time period between the bench press and installation of the device and train was not reasonable. Can the device be tested and taken to the other location? Application no, because the statute 232.409C requires the device shall be tested in the initial terminal on other point of the installation and implies the device must receive the test required by the end of the train regulation. The location of the yard will be installed on the train. Alright, what are the testing requirements for the locomotive power and change with the different front unit used? Power installation, whether the front, rear of the device, or all testing requirements apply with the locomotive power is changed, and that new front device is installed in the train. All testing requirements apply. If the front of the device replaced with the device of the trailing locomotive installed, testing applies into the new installation of the front device. What about calibration requirements? In accordance with Statute 232.409, with the front and rear units that have been calibrated in accuracy in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications and procedures, at least once every 368 days. Test should include the testing radio frequency modulation. 360 days does not include an up to 92-day shelf life prior to the placing of the unit in service. The date of the calibration, location, whether the calibration, and the name of the person performing the calibration has to be legally displayed. Whether the reason isn't a sticker or other marking device affixed with the outside of the device in both front and rear unit, the railroad responsibility to account for the shelf life, and by entering the insert of the date of the sticker, the number of the day of the shelf life of the sticker. If the device integrity of the computer or locomotive, the sticker information can be entered within the form 61849A. The sticker information must be accessible to the FRA inspector train crew members. Therefore, it can be locked in cabinet out of view. Are railroads required to keep spare batteries in specific locations? No, it is within railroad discretion to determine when and where batteries will be kept in charge. The sufficient incentive of the railroads to ensure the batteries are sufficiently charged at all times by speed restriction imposed by the train developed in failures to route and strict liability for failures of batteries en route. The inspector can determine whether the battery failed en route, and submission violation should be strongly considered. What actions have been taken with the device that developed the failure en route? And the device develops a failure en route. The speed of the train restricted to 30 miles an hour. In addition to observing the 30 mile an hour speed restriction, the train is not permitted to operate over the series of the track of average grade of the 2% grade over the distance 2 continuous speed miles unless the conditions contained in Statute 232.407 are met. When some of the units, the front of the rear failure, the rear to front failures are displayed, are both of the failures considered an en route failure. Since the intent of the rule is to have capability of the initiating emergency brake application in the rear of the train, only the front of the train failure is considered an en route failure. The rear of the train failure does not affect the ability of the device to initiate the emergency from the rear of the train. If the engineer is usably determined the communication failure to the front of the rear of the the communication failure must be considered an en route failure. Corrective action must be taken. Is intermittent communication failure considered an en route failure? No, there has been a continuous loss of communication between the front and the rear of the unit of the period greater than 16 minutes or in 30 seconds. However, based on the existing design for the devices currently used, the end times displayed in common loss, 16 minutes and 30 seconds have elapsed, and the locomotive engineer must comply with the restriction required for the failure en route requirements. Can a train proceed over a heavy grade with a defective device? The train can proceed over a heavy grade unless the defective device is replaced over the fully operating device. One fully alternative method is an occupied locomotive header is attached to the rear of the train with the brake pipe. The connection with the tested to ensure the brake pipe operation. The help engineer will initiate and maintain two-way device radio communication with the engineering ahead of the train, and the communication lost prior to the passing of the crest of the grade. The train should be stopped until the communication has been restored. If this can be done safely, if the communication loss of once the descent has begun, the helper locomotive head engineer will act to stop at the train. Train reaches the predetermined rate of speed that indicates the need for the emergency brake of the predetermined rate of speed. Established railroad should indicate the railroad timetable. 2. An occupied caboose is attached to the end of the train. A tested functional brake valve capable of initiating the emergency brake application from the caboose. The occupation of the caboose must establish and maintain the radio voice and the head of the engineer in the same manner as the prescribed the occupied locomotive helper. 3. A radio control locomotive is located on the rear of the train under the continuous control head of the engineer and means of the telemetry. If the radio control locomotive is capable of initiating an emergency brake application from the lead controlling locomotive. Does this mean the train would have to stop at the grade if the failures occur? Whenever the failures occur, the train is prohibited from operating over the section of the track with the average grade of the 2% of the grade or over the distance of 2 continuous miles. If the train develops a failure with the transverse grade of 232 and 409 G2, a statute's engineer safely continued down the grade to the specified siding in accordance with the railroad operating procedure to bringing the train to a stop, the first available location, rather than bringing the train to an immediate stop. If a helper locomotive is used in the head of the train, does it have to be linked to the two-way end of the train? If the locomotive helper is attached to the front of the train to help the train over a grade, it would not have to be linked to a two-way end of the train device. The locomotive was originally controlled, and the train is still armed and capable of initiating emergency brake command to the rear device. Two-way device for radio initiated and maintained by the helper locomotive engineer and the engineer on the original lead locomotive until the move is completed. The communication is lost, and each engineer immediately acts as stop of the train, and train reaches the predetermined rate of the speed indicates the need of the emergency brake. A predetermined rate of speed established by the railroad shall be indicated with the railroad timetable. This only applies to the extent necessary for the helper unit to provide power to get the train over the grade. If a train were to have the problem stop with the tunnel with the communication is lost, it would take longer than 60 minutes and 30 seconds to correct. Could the train move out of the tunnel so the communication could be reestablished, or is the communication failure to require other corrective measures? If the incident occurred with the train would allow it to be moved out of the tunnel, once out of the tunnel the communication is not reestablished, the train would have to be brought into the immediate stop and brought to an immediate stop. Corrective action of the communication failure would have to be taken. If the train has to be cut between the insufficient power to get over the hill, what has to be done with regard to the two-way end of the train? The train has to be cut because this insufficient power to pull over the hill or grade. A device may remain in the place of the car at the rear of the train. It does not have to be advanced for the moving of the section of the train. This only applies to the extent necessary to transverse the grade, only while the train is provided with the guidance procedure. Can a local train that is not equipped with a two-way end of the train device operate over above 30 miles an hour? A local train in the statute 232-407A3 that does not operate with a section over the track which an above grade of 2% of the 2 continuous miles can run an authorized track speed without two-way end of the train device, and in many cases that could be above 30 miles an hour. Can a work train operate above 30 miles an hour if not equipped on the two-way end of the train? And the work train is defined in Statute 232-407A4 that does not operate over the section of the track with an average of the grade speed rate of 2% of the 2 continuous miles. Can run at an authorized track speed without a two-way end of the train device. This can be above 30 miles an hour. Can any train be dispatched with a two-way end of the train device if it does not exceed 30 miles? Only if the train will not travel over that heavy grade as defined in Statute 232-407A1 or is specifically expected with the requirements in Statute 232-407E. If the train is equipped with electronically controlled brakes or ECP, would the end of the train be required? Yes, because the end of the electronically controlled brake system sets currently operating an overlay system regardless of the pneumatic brakes, since their communication can be either electronically regular pneumatic mode or the two-way end of the train device would have to be on the rear of the train. The train is electronically two-way end of the train requirements will be covered by the waiver permitting the type of the operation. The motor power and equipment 9862 two-way at the end of the train device flowchart. The following flowchart was developed to provide better understanding when the two-way end of the train device is required. All training operation given the general railroad system have to comply with the regulation unless specific waivers in effect with particular operation. Alright, two-way end of the train device. The freightway operating general RR systems speed greater than 30 miles an hour. No, but yes. Going to operating over heavy grade, you have yes for a local work train, yes for two-way end of the train requirement, yet no for a two-way end of the train device not required. Subpart G.